The Book of Mormon was translated in 1829, and we can read in 1 Nephi chapter 13, verses 38 through 39. And it came to pass that I beheld the remnant of the seed of my brethren, that's Nephi talking about his brethren the Lamanites, and also the book of the Lamb of God, that's the Bible or the stick of Judah, which had proceeded from the mouth of the Jews, that it came forth from the Gentiles unto the remnant of the seed of my brethren. And after it had come forth unto them, I beheld other books, which came forth by the power of the Lamb, from the Gentiles unto them, unto the convincing of the Gentiles, and the remnant of the seed of my brethren, and also the Jews, who were scattered upon all the face of the earth, that the records of the prophets and of the 12 apostles of the Lamb are true. Joseph Smith wrote an article called An Extract from the Prophecy of Enoch, and that's in the Evening and Morning Star back in August of 1832. He stated the following: "It may be well to observe here that the Lord greatly encouraged and strengthened the faith of his little flock, which had embraced the fullness of the everlasting gospel, as revealed to them in the Book of Mormon, by giving some more extended information upon the scriptures, a translation of which had already commenced." He's referring to his Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, or the inspired version of the Bible. "Much conjecture and conversation frequently occurred among the saints concerning the books mentioned and referred to in various places in the Old and New Testaments, which were now nowhere to be found. The common remark was, they are lost books. But it seems the Apostolic Church had some of these writings, as Jude mentions or quotes the prophecy of Enoch, the seventh from Adam. To the joy of the little flock, which in all from Colesville to Canandaigua, New York, numbered about 70 members, did the Lord reveal the following doings of olden times from the prophecy of Enoch." So the Lord told Joseph Smith in March of 1835, and we can read this in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 96, "Behold, here is wisdom, yea, to be a seer, a revelator, a translator, and a prophet, having all the gifts of God, which he bestows upon the head of the church." In essence, he is saying that he got and received revelation on the book of Enoch back in 1830, and it can be validated here soon. So how can we validate it? Well, can we validate Joseph being a revealer of ancient texts? So again, in March of 1835, the revelation that was given to Joseph alluded to the book of Enoch. These things were written in the book of Enoch and are to be testified of in due time. In other words, anything after 1835 that has anything to do with a book or books of Enoch would validate that. So this was 4 years after Moses chapters 6 and 7, which are the Enoch chapters, were received. And they were received from 1830 to 1831. These chapters were part of larger writings reflected on other fragments that revealed to Joseph. So let's take a look at these fragments. So the Book of Mormon contains an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi and also the Lamanites, along with an abridgment taken from the Book of Ether. We also have the Little Apocalypse, an extract from a translation of the Bible, the New Testament being the 24th chapter of Matthew. You have the Book of Abraham, that's written by his own hand upon papyrus. And of course, now we have the visions and writings of Moses, which is found in the Pearl of Great Price. Each of these writings are abbreviated and only a sampling, but large enough to be compared with other ancient writings that claim similar authorship and can be used to test the validity of those revelations of Joseph Smith. So what was available to Joseph in his day and back in 1830? Well, you could read in the Old Testament the following: Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's the only thing that we find in the Old Testament. Now in the New Testament we have a couple. We have Hebrews 11:5, and also in Jude chapter 1 verses 14 and 15. In Hebrews we learned from Paul that Enoch was translated, and Jude says Enoch, also the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these things, saying, "Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of the saints to execute judgment upon all." So we can use these as a guide to see if any of this information can be found in other works that come forth later. Now, Jude mentioned that Enoch was the seventh from Adam. So in my annotated edition of the book of Enoch, I show the genealogy: Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and then Enoch. And he lived in the days of Jared. And so I have another page of an insight page on my annotated edition that highlights that 1,000-year reign where Jared lived. So off to the left I have an insight page from my annotated book of Enoch where I show the chronology of the Enoch text, and I have in those boxes numbers. So if we look at those numbers, we'll see what the timeline tells us. So number 1, that's in the Old Testament time. That's where we read in Genesis, and Enoch lived 1605 years and begat Methuselah. Number 2 is those verses that are found in the New Testament. So in Hebrew, Enoch was translated, and in Jude, Enoch also the seventh from Adam. Then number 3 is when the explorer James Bruce in 1773 goes to Ethiopia and returns back to Scotland, and he has 3 copies of an Enoch text written in Ge'ez, which is an ancient South Semitic language. And then in number 4, that's in 1821 when Richard Lawrence translates that Ge'ez manuscript into English, and that will be later called First Enoch because it was done first. This single manuscript was housed in the Bodleian Library in Cambridge, and it was not in book form until 1838. But anyways, this is the beginning of a translation of an Enoch text. So in number 5, that's when Joseph Smith receives, from November 1830 to February 1831, those revelations that are known as the Enoch text that's found in Moses chapters 6 and 7. The revelation would later be canonized as scripture entitled The Writings of Moses, and are included in the Pearl of Great Price of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Before we get into the first vision itself, I do have to say something about this moment in church history, because I got to see evidence of the moment, and it's mind-blowing. When I was back in college a million years ago, I worked at the Religious Studies Center at BYU on the transcription of the Joseph Smith translation manuscripts. And I've talked a little bit about this in other lessons, but the church had some amazing opportunities to be able to scan all the original manuscripts of the Joseph Smith translation. Those are still in possession of the Community of Christ, the former reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And through some miraculous synergy between the two religions, our church helped their church with some preservation kinds of things of the manuscripts, because they're getting old. And their church was kind enough to offer our church in return the rights to be able to scan all those images ourselves. And once we had the images, the next big project that BYU wanted to do was to make a scholarly transcription. Now, a transcription is different from a translation. Joseph did the translation. And the version that is produced by the Community of Christ, it's called the inspired version, is an accurate description or transcription of what the final result of Joseph's work on the JST. I mean, we've got a ton of the important ones in our footnotes in the Bible, okay? But if you want an actual, this is what the final product of the JST looked like, then you can buy an inspired version from the Community of Christ. But what the scholars wanted was not just the end result, they wanted to be able to see process. And for that, you got to see the manuscripts. And with the manuscripts, it's amazing, because you really see, you can almost envision Joseph and Sidney at work on this. And there are times where it just flows beautifully. I call it a Mozart masterpiece, because Mozart was famous for having it already all worked out in advance. And his first draft was his final draft. Some of you are thinking, oh, that's how I always wrote my papers in college or in high school. And it's like, yeah, we're not Mozarts though, okay? Your first draft wasn't supposed to be your final draft. Keep editing, revising, okay? But for Mozart, it's like, wait, why change it? I already did all the changes in my head. This is how it is. And there are places in the JST that it's like that. The visions of Enoch in Moses 6 and 7 is a Mozart masterpiece. It's just like, write as fast as you can, because it's coming. But
again, these things were all written in the book of Enoch, and are to be testified in due time. Again, this is back in March of 1835. So we'll continue with the timeline. Number 6 is when In 1840, Elder Parley P. Pratt reviews the 1838, the Book of Enoch the Prophet, in the Millennial Star, Volume 1, printed in Manchester, England. It was published in 1840. Then, in 1840, in the same year, the English translation of the Sefer Yahashar is published. That's chapters 3 and 4 about Enoch. Sefer Yahashar is the book of Jasher. In 1866, that's number 8, the Slavonic Enoch, that's Church Slavonic Enoch, was discovered in the Belgrade Public Library in Moscow, Russia. And then in 1895, Richard Morphel translates this Slavonic text into English. That is now referred to as Second Enoch. Then number 10, in 1912, R.H. Charles refines the first Enoch English text. And then in 1928, which is number 11, Hugo Oderberg collects fragments of Hebrew writings and produces the Sefer Hekaloch, which is now referred to as Third Enoch. Finally, the number 12, in 1952, Aramaic fragments of Enoch are discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and an English translation was made in 1974. This is the Millennial Star, Volume 1, that Parley P. Pratt was the editor, and I have in the red box the Apocryphal Book of Enoch. We have now in our possession a book, the title page of which reads as follows: The Book of Enoch, the Prophet, an apocryphal production, supposed for ages to have been lost, but discovered at the close of the last century in Abyssinia. And so this apocryphal production is an important word, so let's explore that. So in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 91, this was given because Joseph Smith used for his inspired version of the Bible an H&E Finney Company Bible that included the Apocrypha. So when he had completed both the Old and New Testament, he wanted to ask the Lord, should he do the Apocrypha as well? And so this revelation was given to him in 1833. The prophet at that time, he was engaged in the translation of the Old Testament, having come to that portion of ancient writings called the Apocrypha, or the hidden things, he inquired of the Lord and received the following instruction. Verily thus saith the Lord unto you concerning this Apocrypha, there are many things contained therein that are true, and it is mostly translated correctly. There are many things contained therein that are not true, which are interpolations by the hands of men. And then he goes on, he says, therefore whoso readeth, let him understand, for the Spirit manifesteth truth. And whoso is enlightened by the Spirit shall obtain benefit from thereof. In fact, the Old and New Testaments included many interpolations from the hands of men. That's why Joseph Smith was given as a branch of his calling to correct those interpolations. So although chapters 2 through 8 of the Book of Moses and the Pearly Great Price are entitled The Writings of Moses, Joseph Smith did not indicate that he ever had a manuscript in his hands. He received the writings through pure revelation. Those revelations then act as a control to his claim to be a seer and a revelator. How? Later Enoch manuscripts, what I just described, or those fragments that became available that support those revelations would validate his claim as a revealer of ancient writings. Hugh Nibley stated the following: the only really valid test of the authenticity of an ancient record, which does not depend on the writing materials used, nor the language in which it was written, nor the method of translation, but simply asks the question, how does it compare with other records known to be authentic? It offers the nearest thing to a perfectly foolproof test, neat, clear-cut, and decisive of Joseph Smith's claim to inspiration. So the annotated edition of the Book of Enoch includes Enoch texts from various fragments discovered in different lands and languages. So the first section is the Ethiopic Enoch, which is now referred to as First Enoch. The next is the Slavonic, or the Church Slavonic, Second Enoch. And then the Hebrew, Third Enoch. We've also included the Book of Moses. That's the vision that Joseph Smith received that includes the Enoch text, which is chapters 6 and 7 of the Book of Moses. And they also include chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Jasher. The Ethiopic, Slavonic, and Hebrew books of Enoch show a mark of authenticity as each repeats similar themes. The Sefer Yahashar, which is the book of Jasher, likewise establishes itself as an authentic ancient record, as it also repeats many of these same themes. What follows are side-by-side comparisons of just a sampling of selected parallel passages taken from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd books of Enoch, the book of Jasher, and the book of Moses. The many passages shown are from sources far removed from each other in time and place. These passages demonstrate that ancient texts have been preserved throughout thousands of years and substantiates consistency of the stories told. Importantly, they validate the revelations Joseph Smith received and solidify his credentials as a prophet, seer, and revelator. So to the left I have the page 1 from the first Enoch, which is the Ethiopic Enoch, and I put in the red box the following: I, Enoch, am a righteous man, whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens. That's in verse 2. Now you compare that to Joseph Smith's Enoch, which we find in Moses. And here's what it says in Moses chapter 6:35. Anoint thine eyes with clay, and wash them, and thou, Enoch, shalt see. It's a pretty good hit there. So now I'm going to compare the book of Moses, which was revealed to Joseph in 1830, to the Ethiopic text that was put in book form in 1838. And the Lord showed Enoch all things, even to the ends of the world. And I, Enoch, alone saw the vision, the end of all things, and no man shall see as I have seen. In Moses 6:37, it came to pass that Enoch went forth in the land among all the people sitting upon the hills and the high places. And in 1st Enoch, we say they brought me to a place of darkness and to a mountain whose summit reached to heaven. And in Moses chapter 7, verse 36, wherefore I can stretch forth my hands and hold all the creations which I have made. And in Enoch, 1st Enoch 9, verse 11, he knows before the world was created what is forever. We'll continue with the comparisons to 1st Enoch. In Moses, Satan came unto Cain, swear unto me by thy throat, and if thou shalt die, and swear thy brethren by their heads. We look into 1st Enoch chapter 6, and Satan, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they answered him and said, let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan. Another one is in Moses 6, verse 57. Wherefore teach it unto your children that all men everywhere must repent, or they can no wise inherit the kingdom of God. For no unclean thing can dwell there, or dwell in his presence. For in the language of Adam, man of holiness is his name, and the name of his only begotten is the Son of Man, even Jesus Christ. And in 1st Enoch chapter 48, and at that hour the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits. Now we're going to compare the book of Moses to the 2nd Enoch, which is the Slavonic Enoch. In Moses 7, we get the following. And it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Enoch, and told Enoch all the things of the children of men. Wherefore Enoch knew, and he looked upon their wickedness and their misery, and wept, and stretched forth his arms, and his heart swelled wide as eternity. And his bowels yearned, and all eternity shook. And Enoch saw this, he had bitterness of soul, and he wept over his brethren. In 2nd Enoch, this is the Slavonic Enoch, and I saw all forefathers from all time with Adam and Eve. And I, Enoch, sighed and broke into tears, and said of the ruin of their dishonor, woe is me, for my infirmity, and for that of my forefathers. Moses chapter 1, and in the day when the children of men shall esteem my words as naught, and take many of them from the book which thou shalt write, I will raise up another like unto thee, and they shall be head among the children of men. And in 2nd Enoch, apply your mind, Enoch, and know him who is speaking to you, and take thence the books which you yourself have written. So writing of books is an important part of keeping a book of remembrance and to help us learn what the Lord has spoken to those in times past. Now we're going to compare the book of Moses to the book of third Enoch, which is the Hebrew Enoch. Moses 7, it came to pass that God of heaven looked upon the rest of the people, and he wept, and Enoch bore a record of it, saying, How is it that the heavens weep, and shed forth their tears as the rain upon the mountains? And Enoch said unto the Lord, How is it that thou canst weep, seeing thou art holy, and from all eternity to all eternity? And look what happens when we see third Enoch. Again, this is a fragment. It's called chapter 48a, verse 4. In that moment, the right hand of the Almighty was weeping, and there went forth from its 5 fingers 5 rivers of tears, and fell down into the great sea, and shook the whole world. When God wept over the destruction of the temple, Enoch fell on his face and said, I will weep, but weep not thou. God answered and said, If thou wilt not suffer me to weep, I will go whither thou cannot come, and there will I lament. Moses 7, verses 41 through 43, and Satan came among them, saying, I am also a son of God. And Satan commanded them, saying, Believe it not. And they believed it not. And they, who are the children of Adam and Eve, loved Satan more than God. And in the Hebrew book of 3 Enoch, he answered and said unto me, Because I am Enoch, the son of Jared. For when the generation of the flood sinned, and were confounded in their deeds, saying unto God, Depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. So the book of Moses, 1830, we're going to read, Why is it that I, Enoch, have found favor in thy sight, and am but a lad? And look what happens in the Hebrew Enoch, 3 Enoch. My king calls me youth. Why do they call thee youth? And then in the book of Moses, this is chapter 8 rather, and this was given in 1831. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, This son shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And then in first Enoch, that's the Ethiopic, and when Methuselah had heard the words of his father Enoch, for he had shown him everything in secret, he returned and showed them to him, and called the name of that son Noah, for he will comfort the earth after all the destruction. And in the book of Jasher, which is interesting, the wife of Lamech conceived and bare him a son at the time, the revolution of the year. And Methuselah called his name Noah, saying, The earth was in his days at rest and free from corruption. And Lamech his father called his name Menachem, saying, This one will comfort us in our works and miserable toil in the earth which God has cursed. Now note that the boy's name Menachem is Hebrew origin, meaning comforter. So now we're going to compare the book of Moses to Jasher. So Moses chapter 6, it came to pass that they heard Enoch, no man laid his hands on him, for fear came on all them that heard him. For he walked with God, and as Enoch spake forth the words of God, the people trembled. Here we have in Jasher, and all the sons of men were greatly afraid of Enoch, and they feared to approach him, on account of the godlike awe that was seated upon his countenance. Therefore no man could look on him, fearing that he might be punished and die. In Enoch we see the same thing. I spoke to them, they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. Moses 7, and Enoch and all his people walked with God, and he dwelt in the midst of Zion, and it came to pass that Zion was not, for God received it unto his own bosom, and from thence went forth the saying, Zion is fled. And in Jasher, Enoch went forth, and all the sons of men went after him, about 800,000 men. And after he ascended into heaven, a whirlwind, the men who had remained with him were also missing. And in Enoch, we see the following: In those days, a whirlwind carried me off from the earth and set me down the end of heaven. We have one final one from 3rd Enoch. This is again translated in 1928, and we're going to compare it to the book of Jasher that was published in 1840. In 3rd Enoch we see, "And every command that Enoch utters to you in my name do you observe and fulfill. For the Prince of wisdom and understanding have I committed to him to instruct him in the wisdom of heavenly things and of earthly things, in the wisdom of this world and of the world to come." And in 1st Enoch we see the following: "The second vision which he saw, the vision of wisdom, which Enoch the son of Jared saw, and this is the beginning of the words of wisdom, which I lifted up my voice to speak." And of course in Moses we see, "So powerful was the word of Enoch, and so great the power of the language which God had given to him." So in Jasher we see the following: "And sometime after, when the kings and princes, sons of men, were speaking to Enoch, and Enoch was teaching the ways of God, behold, an angel of the Lord then called unto Enoch from heaven, and wished to bring him up to heaven, to make him reign over there, over the sons of God, as he had reigned over the sons of men upon the earth. When at the time Enoch heard this, he went and assembled all the inhabitants of the earth, and taught them wisdom and knowledge, and gave them divine instructions. And he said to them, I have been required to ascend into heaven. I therefore do not know the day of my going. And now therefore I will teach you wisdom and knowledge, and will give you instruction before I leave you, how to act upon earth, whereby you may live." So the book of 1st Enoch corroborates the LDS doctrine is the following. He says, "Those who have called upon my glorious name will I cause mine elect to dwell among them, and I will transform the heaven and make it an eternal blessing and light. I will transform the earth and make it a blessing, and I will cause mine elect ones to dwell upon it. But the sinners and evildoers shall not set foot thereon." So now, what do we get in our 10th article of faith? We believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes of Zion. That Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent. That Christ will reign personally upon the earth, and that the earth will be renewed and receive its paradisical glory. So off to the left, I have in the red box a portion of the Book of Mormon in Helaman that has Samuel the Lamanite, who is going to prophesy and tell the people of Nephi some of the things that are going to happen to them. So the question is, does the Book of Mormon have a portion of the Ethiopic text in it that could have been on the plates of brass? So if we read in Helaman, we see, "For your desolation is already come upon you, and your destruction is made sure. Yea, in that day you shall say, Oh, that we had remembered the Lord our God in the days that he gave us our riches. And then they would not have become slippery, that we should lose them. For behold, our riches are gone from us." That's in Helaman 13, 32, 33. So what I've done is I've put in the color these letters. You got A, B, C, D, E, F. So there's 6 elements, 6 specific words that are going to be found in Samuel the Lamanite's prophecy. So now let's go and see what we can read in 1st Enoch chapter 94. "Enoch the prophet said, Woe unto you rich, for you have trusted in your riches, and from your riches you shall depart, because you have not remembered the Most High in the days of your riches, and your Creator will rejoice at your destruction." So again, if I look at the same 6 elements and label them and color them, they are equal. So what I find interesting is that there's almost a chiastic pattern that is being seen here, which is a Hebrew form of writing. And so I believe that in the plates of brass that they had, that portions of Enoch text were in that those plates, and that they were well aware of it, and that's why Samuel the Lamanite is quoting from Enoch. Off to the left, I have an insight page from the annotated book of Jasher, where I compare Jasher to the book of Abraham, where Abraham sees in the nighttime the sun, stars, and moon. So the book of Abraham, we can read, "I, Abraham, saw the stars, that they were very great, and that one of them was nearest unto the throne of God. And there were many great ones which were near unto it. And the Lord said unto me, These are the governing ones, and the name of the great one is Kolob, because it is near unto me. For I am the Lord thy God. I have set this one to govern all those which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest. And he said unto me, This is Shinah, which is the sun. And he said unto me, Kokab, which is star. And he said unto me, Oli, which is the moon. And he said unto me, Kokobin, which signifies stars, or all the great lights, which were in the firmament of heaven. Now let's compare this to the books of Enoch. So in Abraham, we have Kolob being the great one. And in 1 Enoch, we read that one of those planets was one is larger than the rest. In the book of Abraham, we have the word Kokab. In the books of Enoch, we have Kokabel in 1 Enoch, and Kokbiel in 3 Enoch, and then Oli, which is moon, and then Ophaniel, who is an angel over the globe of the moon. So in 1 Enoch, we have Kokabel, he taught the constellations, Kokbiel, who is appointed over the planets in 3 Enoch, and then Kokabiel is the angel of the stars, and that's in another work called The Legend of the Jews, and that also is included in my book, Annotated Book of Enoch. I have 2 insight pages off to the left in my Annotated Book of Enoch. I have written in a poetical form this phrasing where all of the words end in the same word, us. So if you get over us, hated us, smote us, devoured us, robbed us, dispersed us, murdered us, against us. That's known as an epistrophe. That's the sentences that end in the same word. And in the book of Jasher, we have the same kind of phraseology as well as in the book of Mormon, especially in the book of Ether. And so that specifically states that the book of Enoch, the first Enoch, is a Hebrew book. And off to the right, I have another page of the annotated edition of the book of Enoch from 2nd Enoch. This is the Church Slavonic Enoch. And in 2nd Enoch, it says, Their faces shining like the sun, standing at the head of my bed, and began to call me by name. That's Enoch describing that. And that's similar to Moroni's visit to Joseph Smith, where he says, A light appeared in my room, light of the noonday, a personage appeared at my bed, he called me by name. So off to the left, I have another insight page called the 10-week time period. This is based on the Enoch calendar, and I have a whole section on that, especially by John Pratt, who the late John Pratt, that was specialty was on ancient religious calendars. And according to the Enoch calendar, there are specific time periods called weeks. It starts with Enoch, Noah, then Abraham, Moses, the house of David, Jesus Christ, the apostasy, the Reformation, the gospel restoration, and then finally the millennial time, which is eternal life. Now, off to the right, I give you examples of my Enoch text comparisons. I have 16 pages of double columns that highlight the different passages on the book of Moses compared to the various Enoch texts that have been found. Again, a couple of pages from the annotated edition of the book of Enoch where I explain the Enoch calendar, highlight that, and then also how John Pratt amplifies what he learns about the importance of that Enoch calendar. Again, I have a couple more pages from the annotated Enoch where I have a composition called The Legends of the Jews by Louis Ginsberg, who is a German rabbi and who collected all of the different writings of the Hebrews, and he then creates this storyline based on those records. And so I include volume 1 section 3 that relates to the book of Enoch and how they compare to all the other works that we have just gone over. So in his 2010 master's thesis at Durham University in England, Salvatore Cirillo cites that the available evidence that Smith had access to published works related to First Enoch has moved beyond probability to fact. He concludes, I argue that Smith did in fact have access to First Enoch and a variety of other Enoch materials that are beyond parallels. There are substantial similarities that further argue influence occurred. Now you compare that to, however, reflecting on the coincidence of appearance of the first English translation of First Enoch in 1821, just a few years before Smith received his Enoch revelations, Richard L. Bushman concludes, it is scarcely conceivable that Joseph Smith knew of Lawrence's Enoch's translation. Perhaps even more significant is the fact that the principal themes of Lawrence's 105 translated chapters do not resemble Joseph Smith Enoch in any obvious way. And in fact, when Lawrence published it in 1821, it was only in a manuscript form. It wasn't until 1838 that a book was then published. So there's no way that Joseph Smith ever got on a boat that went over to England to look into the Bodleian Library in Cambridge, England. There's no way. So the most striking resemblances Joseph Smith's writings are in Enoch literature published after Joseph Smith's death in 1844. Enoch's anointing and clothing of new garments. Endowed Latter-day Saint readers of the Book of Moses will find interest in the 1896 Second Enoch Slavonic account about Enoch's ascension to the highest heaven and his initiation to the heavenly mysteries in that celestial realm. At one point, the Lord commands Michael, who we now know as Adam, to anoint and clothe Enoch, saying, go and take Enoch and remove his earthly garments and anoint him with my sweet anointment and put him into the garments of my glory. That's in 2 Enoch chapter 22 verse 8. The LDS temple ceremony was revealed in Nauvoo in 1842. As a result of this investiture, Enoch declares, I looked at myself and I was like transfigured one of his glorious ones. So can we validate Joseph being a revealer of ancient texts? Yes, we can. These things were written in the book of Enoch and are to be testified of in due time. And that was given again in March 28th of 1835. Moses chapters 6 and 7 were received from November through February to 1831. They both provide physical evidence that Joseph Smith revealed in ancient biblical text. How so? Because the post-1835 published English Ethiopic First Enoch in 1838, the Slavonic Second Enoch in 1896, and the Hebrew Third Enoch in 1928, and the book of Jasher in 1840 show substantial parallels to those chapters and reveal additional truths as found in the books of Mormon, Abraham, Jasher, and modern Revelation. If you have any interest in what you have learned, you can contact me at drhawking@gmail.com. I have books at my website called beaconlightbooks.com. They are the annotated editions of the Book of Mormon, the Book of Isaiah, the Book of Jasher, and I've also included just recently the Joseph Smith translation of the New Testament. Thank you for your time.